It took almost 3 years for my brain to heal. So I came back to work 18 months later, but I was still so totally different from what I am now. I like that.
Barbara Mandrell was not just a country music star. She was the face that shook Nashville in the 1970s and 80s, daring to break old molds by blending country with R&B, soul, and pop. From a child prodigy on instruments in Texas, Barbara rose to become a complete entertainment icon, singer, performer, and television host. Winning Entertainer of the Year at the CMA Awards 2 years in a row, a feat few have ever matched, along with hits like Sleeping Single in a Double Bed and I Was Country. When country wasn't cool, secured her place among the legends. But Barbara's journey was not without shadows. A devastating car accident in 1984 changed both her career and her life, leaving scars on her body and spirit. Then, in 1997, still at the height of her fame, she stunned the public by walking away from the stage, choosing a reclusive life devoted to her family. That decision shook fans, but also revealed the truth of who she was. A woman willing to leave behind the spotlight to protect what she valued most. The story of Barbara Mandrell, therefore, is not only the tale of a country superstar, but also a lesson in resilience, sacrifice, and how one woman faced both glory and darkness to find peace for herself. Early life. Barbara Ann Mandrell was born on December 25, 1948, on Christmas Day in Houston, Texas. For many, that date might have symbolized good fortune, but for Barbara, life from the very start was a journey marked by both gift and burden. The eldest of 3 daughters, she grew up in a household where music was not only a passion, but also discipline, responsibility, and the heavy weight of expectation placed upon a girl who had barely begun to grow. Her father, Barbara Mandrell, was a guitarist and a shrewd businessman. He saw in his daughter something not to be missed, an innate talent that could be exchanged for a brighter future for the entire family. Her mother, Mary Ellen, taught piano and instilled Barbara's first melodies, gentler than her husband, yet equally firm when it came to taking music seriously. In that home, every note that rang out was not just for entertainment, but a reminder that Barbara's life was bound to perfection. By the age of 5, Barbara had been placed before a steel guitar, a daunting instrument even for adults. Her tiny hands trembled on the strings, often bleeding from endless practice. But sighs and complaints were forbidden. Her father was strict, demanding precision in every note, firmness in every rhythm. Barbara grew up in an environment where mistakes equaled disappointment, and disappointment meant the fear of losing her parents' trust. Pride and pressure were etched deep into her young mind from that point on. At 6, the family moved to Oceanside, California, where Barbara opened a music store. The small shop not only supported the household, but also became Barbara's endless rehearsal room. While neighborhood children played with dolls and games, Barbara spent hours with the steel guitar, piano, or saxophone. The price of talent was a stolen childhood. She grew up surrounded more by instruments than the laughter of friends. But her gift quickly carried her beyond 4 walls. At just 11, she was dubbed the Princess of Steel, dazzling audiences with her mastery of the pedal steel guitar. Her father seized the moment, placing Barbara on stage alongside giants like Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, and George Jones. The crowd marveled at the professionalism of a girl barely in her teens. Yet behind the applause were endless hours of travel, grueling nights of shows, and the loneliness of a child who knew she no longer had space for a normal childhood. An inner conflict grew sharper with time. On one hand, Barbara was proud to stand beside legends, the applause affirming her hard work was not in vain. On the other, she endured the envy of peers, and even some colleagues who believed her success was nothing more than the result of family pressure. Each time, Barbara wondered, was she truly living for passion, or simply the extension of her parents' dream? That conflict deepened when her father created the Mandrell family band. The whole family took the stage, her mother on piano, Barbara on steel guitar, Louise on guitar and bass, and youngest sister Irlene on drums. The band became a sensation, touring widely and even performing in USO shows for troops overseas. Yet behind the stage lights, Barbara wrestled with a truth difficult to admit. Each tour was another piece of her youth she would never reclaim. The Christmas Child of 1948 had by now become a teenage performance machine, carrying the pride and expectations of her family, her audience, and herself. The applause after each show offered a flicker of warmth, a reminder that every sacrifice had meaning. But deep down, she constantly struggled between true passion and heavy duty as the eldest daughter. It was this early life, marked by pressure and strict discipline, that forged not only a gifted artist, but also a resilient spirit. One who would later dare to break boundaries and carve her own indelible mark as Barbara Mandrell. Early career. Emerging from a childhood traded for skill, Barbara Mandrell carried with her an unmatched arsenal. A 15-year-old girl who could play nearly a dozen instruments, had logged hundreds of hours on stage, and had already stood beside legends like Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash. But moving from a child prodigy who sparked curiosity to becoming a true artist with a name of her own required enduring a phase filled with trials, where the spotlight came hand in hand with doubt and a lingering loneliness. At 17, she signed her first contract with Columbia Records under the guidance of Billy Sherrill, the famed Nashville producer who had shaped Tammy Wynette's career. Her first singles, such as Queen for a Day and I've Been Loving You Too Long, to Stop Now, revealed a strong, emotive voice but failed to break through in the fiercely competitive Nashville market. The 1960s marked a time when country music began to fuse with pop, a trend audiences both embraced and resisted. For Barbara, accustomed to versatility since childhood, this was a risky turn. Success could open new roads. Failure would leave her trapped under the shadow of the instrumental prodigy label. In those early years, Barbara was constantly compared to established female singers. Some critics cruelly claimed she owed her success to her looks and family backing. Each jab cut into her pride, keeping her awake at night. She longed to prove that she was more than a girl who could play guitar or accordion, that she was an artist with her own voice. That drive pushed her into the studio, rehearsing until her voice was hoarse, searching for a sound distinct enough to break free of the prodigy tag. The breakthrough arrived in the early 1970s when several of her singles entered the Billboard country charts. Among them, Tonight, My Baby's Coming Home, 1971, became a milestone. It was the first time Barbara Mandrell's name broke into the top 10. The song's upbeat tempo and lyrics about a woman eagerly awaiting her husband's return resonated with America's working class, and Barbara delivered it with energy and optimism. Behind the scenes, she admitted that the song's lively rhythm had rescued her from despair after a string of failed singles. When she stepped on stage to sing it, she was no longer the Mandrell girl from the family, but an independent artist, validated by thunderous applause. Yet tonight, My Baby's Coming Home also exposed Barbara's inner conflict. On the one hand, it made her shine, affirming the country pop direction she was pursuing. On the other, it drew criticism from traditionalists who accused her of watering down country into cheap entertainment. Between the two camps, Barbara had to choose: stay safely within tradition or step forward into mainstream popularity. She chose the latter and accepted the storms that came with it. On stage, Barbara never failed to surprise. She could be singing, then suddenly switch to steel guitar, then accordion, piano, even saxophone, a rare instrument-switching act in country music. The versatility electrified audiences, though some harsh critics said she was too flashy, lacking identity. Barbara often asked herself, "Am I proving my ability or just doing everything I can so people will remember me?" A nagging uncertainty that never quite left her. Off stage, she was still a young woman yearning for simple things: an afternoon stroll, a casual date, a day without a performance schedule. But whenever she thought of stopping, she remembered her parents, the promises, and the Mandrell name the entire family had staked their hopes on. Each applause reminded her, once she chose this road, there was no turning back. It was this grueling stage of her life that forged Barbara Mandrell's artistic identity. A powerful voice, an artist willing to blur the lines between country and pop, and a woman who understood that recognition sometimes came at the cost of her youth. Though her early career was marked by setbacks and skepticism, it steeled her for the 1970s, with a determination to reach the very top. Career success. After her early years at Columbia and the breakthrough of Tonight, My Baby's Coming Home that carried her into the top 10, Barbara Mandrell entered a new decade determined to establish herself as a true star. It was a time when traditional country still held dominance, yet audiences were beginning to crave fresher sounds infused with soul, R&B, and pop. Barbara saw that opening, and she was the one willing to step in, to blend styles, to endure criticism in order to carve out a path of her own. In 1975, after moving to ABC/Dot Records under the direction of producer Tom Collins, Barbara's career truly ignited. Collins encouraged her to dive into love songs with greater emotional depth and explore bolder themes. The single Standing Room Only quickly became a top 5 hit, paving the way for a string of later successes. On stage, Barbara didn't just sing. She played saxophone, accordion, electric guitar, even banjo, leaving audiences awestruck at the sight of a woman who could command every corner of the performance. By the late 1970s, Barbara Mandrell had stepped into the brightest chapter of her career, releasing songs that not only topped the charts, but also etched themselves into listeners' memories for their symbolism and emotional weight. Sleeping Single in a Double Bed, 1978, was a turning point. The song touched on a familiar pain rarely addressed directly in country music: the loneliness within marriage itself. With a catchy melody, straightforward lyrics, and Barbara's husky warmth, it became her first #1 on the Billboard Country chart. Beneath its seemingly light surface lay a confession of fracture and emptiness many, especially women, had endured. Barbara infused the song with her own emotional experience, convincing audiences she was voicing their truths. The song's success also recast her image. No longer just the multi-instrumental virtuoso, she was now a storyteller unafraid to expose the shadows of marriage. Then came If Loving You Is Wrong, I Don't Want to Be Right, 1979. A bold choice. Originally a soul hit associated with Luther Ingram, it told the story of an illicit love affair. In the country world, where tradition and morality held sway, Barbara's decision to bring it onto a country stage was nothing short of shocking. Yet that very courage carried her into the top 5 and forced critics to reconsider entrenched notions of women in country music. In her voice, the story of infidelity was no longer scandal. It became an aching confession. Love might be wrong by society's standards, but to the heart, it remained undeniable. Her fierce interpretation made the song one of the most daring moments in country music of its time. The emotional peak came with Years, 1979, a tender, haunting ballad. Not only did it return her to number 1, it became one of the timeless songs most closely tied to Barbara Mandrell's name. Unlike the fiery force of her earlier hits, Years unfolded slowly, plaintively, telling of love fading with time. When Barbara sang it, listeners felt chills from its honesty, as if she were revealing her own heartbreak. The ballad cemented her image as not only an explosive performer, but also as someone who could quiet an entire room in shared sorrow. These 3 songs brought Barbara not just chart triumphs, but also major accolades. In 1979, she won the CMA's Female Vocalist of the Year and the ACM's Top Female Vocalist, firmly securing her place among country's elite. The following year, she was honored at the American Music Awards as Favorite Country Female Artist, evidence of her reach far beyond traditional audiences. These awards made it undeniable. Barbara had evolved from a singer striving to prove herself into a consummate artist, willing to voice the unsaid, to risk the untried, and most importantly, to let listeners find themselves in her songs. Still, the marketplace was fiercely competitive among female country artists. Dolly Parton crossed over into pop with her soaring soprano and big blonde hair. Loretta Lynn stayed rooted in Appalachian grit. Barbara chose a third road as the bridge between country tradition and mainstream pop. This exposed her to plenty of barbs, even accusations of selling out. But instead of retreating, Barbara embraced the challenge, determined to prove that country could indeed be music for everyone. Stepping into the 1980s, Barbara Mandrell was no longer a singer struggling to prove herself. She had become a star capable of shaping the very course of country music. It was during this period that everything, music, image, stagecraft, and television, came together to push her career to its absolute peak. It began with Crackers, 1980, a song that seemed trivial on the surface, touching on the petty quarrels of marriage. A husband forgetting to bring home crackers, the small arguments over dinner. Yet its humor struck a chord with millions of American women who both loved and endured their careless husbands. With its upbeat melody, relatable lyrics, and Barbara's delivery, serious yet teasing, Crackers climbed into the top 3. It proved that she wasn't just the voice of heartbreak, but also someone who could make audiences laugh at the bitter truths of domestic life. Right after came I Was Country, When Country Wasn't Cool, 1981, a declaration at a time when disco and pop dominated the airwaves and country was often dismissed as outdated. The song wasn't just Barbara's personal testimony. It became the anthem of Nashville itself, proud, resilient, unbending to trends. Featuring George Jones as a guest vocalist was a masterstroke. His presence served as a seal of authenticity. When their voices intertwined, traditional country fans felt protected, while younger listeners embraced the pride that needed no apology. The song soared to number 1, became a defining anthem of the decade and remains one of country music's most enduring statements of identity. Riding that momentum, Barbara released Barbara Mandrell Live, 1981, capturing her explosive presence on stage. This was not a typical live album. It was proof of what a true entertainer could be. Audiences didn't just attend her concerts to hear music. They came to witness Barbara seamlessly switch between guitar, banjo, saxophone, and pedal steel, to see her dance, tell stories, joke with the crowd, and then silence the entire room with a heartfelt ballad. That energy, preserved on Barbara Mandrell Live, cemented her reputation. In Nashville, no one, not even the men, could dominate a stage like Barbara Mandrell. Glory followed swiftly. In 1980 and 1981, Barbara achieved the unprecedented, becoming the first woman in history to win the CMA Entertainer of the Year award 2 years in a row. This was country's highest honor, long considered a men's domain. Her victory was not just personal triumph, it was a milestone for the entire industry, proving women could not only stand equal, but rise above in a field steeped in gender bias. She also earned ACM's Top Female Vocalist, multiple American Music Awards, and in 1983, a Grammy for the gospel album He Set My Life to Music, a deeply moving project that revealed Barbara not just as an entertainer, but as an artist of faith. Critics hailed the album's sincerity and emotional power, and it brought Barbara new audiences within the religious community, often resistant to mainstream entertainers. Alongside her music came a turning point in television. In 1980, NBC launched Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, where Barbara and her younger sisters, Louise and Arlene, delivered an hour each week of singing, comedy, and lighthearted banter. Within months, the show became a cultural phenomenon. Millions of American families treated it as their Sunday night dinner party. Through this program, Barbara stepped beyond Nashville's borders to become a household name, recognized by children and grandparents alike. Behind the camera, however, was a punishing schedule. Morning tapings, evening concerts, and recording sessions squeezed in between. Barbara admitted that some nights she broke down in tears backstage from exhaustion, but by the next morning she forced herself to smile again, for she believed the audience must never see her fall. The early 1980s, then, were not simply a string of hits, albums, and awards for Barbara Mandrell. It was the era in which she redefined what it meant to be a total entertainer, a woman who could sing, master instruments, command a stage, host a television show, win the industry's highest prizes, and still move hearts with the simplest of stories. This was the period when Barbara didn't just dominate Nashville, she became an icon of American culture itself. Few people knew that after nights of giving everything on stage, Barbara would often sit alone in the dressing room, her body drained. Colleagues recalled moments when she collapsed into a chair, eyes shut tight, only to rise minutes later, straighten her outfit, and walk back out before thousands of fans as if fatigue had never touched her. It was absolute professionalism, but also the harsh price of fame. Ultimately, all the pressure, criticism, and grueling workload only sharpened the portrait of Barbara Mandrell as resilient, not only a singer with countless hits, but a complete entertainer and a pioneer who dared to push country music beyond its limits. Barbara didn't merely stand among Nashville's top stars. She had become a cultural icon, a woman who proved that country could be profound, entertaining, and global all at once. But just as the lights burned brightest, darkness descended. On September 11th, 1984, along Old Hickory Boulevard on the outskirts of Nashville, Barbara's car collided head-on with a sedan driven by a 19-year-old. The sound of metal shattering rang out like thunder. Pulled from the twisted wreckage, Barbara lay unconscious, blood streaming from a head wound, her face swollen, her leg shattered, her brain badly concussed. Doctors told her family bluntly, "She's lucky to be alive." That luck came at a devastating cost. The 19-year-old in the other car did not survive. His death became a tormenting shadow on Barbara's conscience for years to come. Time and again, she agonized. I lived, and that boy did not. Why did God choose it this way? The media only deepened the wound, branding her name with the phrase fatal accident, as if she were the culprit instead of a survivor. Under Tennessee law, the victim's family filed civil lawsuits, turning Barbara's every public appearance into a confrontation with public opinion. Though investigations concluded she was not entirely at fault, the victim's family pursued the state's civil provisions to demand compensation. The first lawsuit came just months after the crash, seeking damages for emotional and material loss. Nashville's papers splashed with polarizing headlines: "Wealthy star versus poor young man." Such one-sided coverage turned public sentiment against Barbara. Many no longer saw her as a victim who barely survived, but as a privileged perpetrator. In the years that followed, overlapping lawsuits involving insurance and civil liability dragged on. Barbara's auto insurance company and the victim's family fought bitterly in court over settlements. Each time her image appeared in the press not in glamorous gowns or with her familiar steel guitar, but with a scarred, weary face under the scrutiny of courtroom cameras. For the media, every hearing became a public spectacle, casting Barbara as the embodiment of a deadly accident. After years of wrangling, the case ended in an out-of-court settlement. The amount was never disclosed, but the emotional toll was crushing. Barbara endured physical pain, guilt, and public suspicion all at once. Years later, she admitted bitterly, "I lost the peace in my heart. Even if my body healed, I was never the same Barbara I was before 1984. For nearly 18 months after the accident, Barbara lived like a different person. She had to learn to walk again, trembling step by trembling step on the balance bar, falling and crying in the rehab room. Her once powerful voice grew weak. She had to relearn diction, relearn breath support, as if she were a novice singer again. Many nights she lay awake, tormented by searing headaches and haunted by the metallic crash of that day. At times, she confessed she believed she would never sing before an audience again. Those months left her with a sense of loss that could never be erased. The career she had built since childhood, at the cost of her youth and freedom, seemed to collapse overnight. The glory, the awards, the blazing concerts, all felt like a distant dream. Fans still loved her, but inside, Barbara questioned, "Do I deserve their love when a life was lost in an accident that involved me?" Yet the steel discipline forged in her harsh upbringing pulled her back to her feet. Nearly 2 years later, Barbara returned to the stage. Fans wept to see her, no longer flawless, but still radiant with pride. Every step she took, every note she sang was proof she had defeated death. From that painful experience, Barbara became a passionate advocate for road safety. In every public appearance, she repeated the same message. "If I hadn't been wearing my seatbelt that day, I wouldn't be here to tell you this." For Barbara, it was no slogan. It was a truth written in blood, tears, and the dreams left behind on Old Hickory Boulevard. The wounds from the 1984 accident left not only scars on Barbara Mandrell's body, but also imprints on her career. After leaving the hospital, she entered an almost 18-month rehabilitation process filled with grueling physical therapy. From learning to walk again, to regaining her breath, to standing before a microphone, Barbara had to relearn everything. When she finally returned to the studio and the stage, audiences still saw a Barbara full of determination, but it was clear she no longer possessed the endurance, stamina, or relentless touring schedule she once commanded. Even so, Barbara refused to surrender. She returned to the studio with astonishing resolve, treating music as the medicine to heal both body and spirit. In the years immediately following the accident, she released new songs that stood as proof she could still hold her ground. Only a Lonely Heart. Nose, released in late 1984 while she was still recovering, was a mournful ballad that quickly reached the Billboard Country Top 10. Evidence that Barbara's rich emotional voice had not been eroded by time or tragedy. A year later came Fast Lanes and Country Roads, 1985, blending traditional country longing with a touch of pop freedom, which also secured a top 10 spot. These successes were not enough to restore her to her former Queen of Entertainment status, but their symbolic meaning was profound. For Barbara, having a song embraced by listeners was proof that her efforts were not in vain, that she had not been pushed off the stage she had devoted her life to. For her fans, it was a sign their idol was still fighting, still present, still singing through the pain. But harsh reality could not be hidden. The intensity of touring, once Barbara's greatest strength with long runs and dozens of shows back-to-back, was now impossible. After her injuries, her body could no longer withstand such punishing schedules. Every trip was exhausting, every performance a battle to stay balanced, to hide the trembling behind the lights. For an artist once celebrated for explosive stage vitality, having to restrain herself was a quiet torment. Barbara pressed forward, but the glow of her fame had shifted. If once she was a blazing fire, now her light was gentler, steadier, a light of resilience rather than eruption. Meanwhile, in Nashville, a new wave was rising. Reba McEntire was shaping her own style, becoming a symbol of female empowerment in country. The Judds, a mother-daughter duo, brought freshness that captivated younger fans. These new names increasingly dominated radio, stages, and award shows, leaving Barbara no longer the uncontested force she had been in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Barbara remained committed to music, both in the studio and on television, but the dazzling spotlight gradually gave way to the aura of a respected elder. By the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, the name Barbara Mandrell still commanded respect, cited as one of the women who had changed the face of country music. But she was no longer the explosive star who once shook Nashville to its core. In 1997, after nearly 3 decades of relentless dedication, Barbara made a decision that stunned Nashville. She retired. She chose the Grand Ole Opry, the sacred hall of country music, as the place for her farewell. That final concert was more than just a show. It was a ritual to close an era. With tears in the audience's eyes, Barbara sang the songs that had defined her, then bowed in an emotional farewell. Afterward, she took a decisive step, selling off all her instruments, the guitars, the equipment that had carried her across the world, as a marker that one chapter had ended. not out of lost passion or bitterness toward the stage. Barbara made it clear. She stepped away to devote herself fully to her husband and 3 children, rather than keep her family apart through endless touring. From then on, Barbara retreated into a simple life. She tended her home, worked in her garden, painted, remained active in her church, and participated in local charity work. She was no longer the star of the grand stage, but Barbara discovered another kind of light, the light of peace and love within her home. Personal life. After her farewell at the Grand Ole Opry, when the stage lights dimmed, Barbara no longer stood before roaring crowds. But behind the curtain, she still had the most important audience of her life, her family. If music had sustained Barbara for 3 decades, then love and home were where she chose to devote the rest of her life. This was the moment when Barbara's personal story, love, marriage, children, became the center, replacing all artistic glory. Barbara Mandrell met Ken Dudney when she was still a teenager, just beginning to step out from the shadow of being a child prodigy. Ken was then a young Navy pilot with a touch of musical involvement, quickly drawn to Barbara's charm and talent. Their romance began gently, but soon faced a barrier. Barbara's father, Herbie Mandrell, her strict manager, feared that marriage would ruin his daughter's budding career. Even so, Barbara followed her heart. In 1967, at only 19, she married Ken, despite the doubts around them. The early years of marriage were marked by separation. Ken was serving in the military, often stationed far from home, while Barbara was constantly touring and recording. At times, the distance and professional pressures strained their relationship nearly to breaking. Barbara admitted that many nights, after a performance, she returned to an empty hotel room, missing her husband and aching over not being able to live like an ordinary woman. But instead of letting go, they chose persistence, exchanging long letters, catching brief phone calls, clinging to these lifelines to preserve their love. When Ken left the service, he became Barbara's steady anchor, quietly supporting her as manager and partner. Together, they built a family with 3 children: Kenneth Matthew, born 1970, Jaime Nicole, 1976, and Nathaniel Dudney, 1985. Yet behind the seemingly perfect family portrait lay silent tensions. While Barbara was absorbed in relentless touring, the children grew up with a mother who was often absent. Holidays, birthdays, even times of illness. Barbara was sometimes hundreds of miles away on stage. She later admitted with anguish, "I missed so many important moments in my children's childhood. That was the price of my career and a wound in my heart that will never fully heal." The devastating accident of 1984 forced the family to face collective pain. Barbara nearly lost everything: her health, her confidence, and her public image. During that time, Ken was not only a husband, but a companion, present through her struggles to walk again, through the pain and the torment of guilt over the young man's death. The children, still small, often saw their mother in tears and became the reason she fought to keep going. Yet the stress of recovery and the scrutiny of the public also brought tension into their home. Barbara grew irritable and withdrawn, while Ken had to learn to endure and shield her. By the 1990s, as their children reached their teenage years, Barbara realized that what she had missed could never be reclaimed. Her decision to retire in 1997 was not out of lost passion, but to make amends to Ken and their 3 children, the ones who had patiently walked with her through every storm. From then on, she embraced a simple life, tending the home with Ken, gardening, painting, staying close to the church, and above all, being present in every moment of family life. The marriage of Barbara and Ken, lasting more than half a century, was no sweet fairy tale. It was marked by distance, tension, and tears. Yet it was precisely those trials that defined a rare and enduring love in the entertainment world. A love that did not glitter under the spotlight, but was steadfast enough to keep Barbara Mandrell standing strong through every upheaval of her life. In her 70s, Barbara Mandrell spends most of her time enjoying life's simple pleasures, tending the garden around her home, painting, doing household chores, taking part in church activities, and supporting community charities. She once shared that after decades of relentless touring, simply waking up in her own home and having breakfast with her husband and children is a priceless happiness. Though she turned away from the stage, Barbara never abandoned music. At times, she still participates in special projects tied to her faith and her country legacy. In 2024, she released Precious Memories, 20 hymns and gospel classics digitally, as a gift to a new generation of listeners. And in 2025, she appeared at Opry 100, a live celebration, where young singer Kelsey Ballerini performed the timeless I Was Country when country wasn't cool in her honor. The moment when Barbara sat quietly in the seat of honor, smiling and nodding, moved the audience deeply. She may have stepped away from the stage, but her legacy still lives on in the hearts of music lovers. Today, Barbara Mandrell is no longer the queen of entertainment with an exhausting schedule, but an ordinary woman devoting her time to her husband, Ken Dudney, and their 3 grown children. In Nashville, she is still respected as one of the rare icons who knew how to retire at the right moment, preserving the most beautiful image in her fans' memories. And in the rare occasions when the public catches a glimpse of her, her eyes still radiate strength and pride, as if to say she has found a light more enduring than any stage spotlight: the peace within her soul. Legacy and influence. When people speak of Barbara Mandrell, they don't only recall a singer who topped the charts or won prestigious awards. What she left behind runs deeper, an artistic legacy and a pathway for the generations that followed. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Barbara was one of the few women bold enough to challenge the boundaries of country music. She blended country with R&B, soul, and pop, creating a fresh sound that carried the genre beyond its traditional confines and into the mainstream. The iconic phrase, "I was country when country wasn't cool," was not just the title of a song, but the declaration of her entire artistic journey, a vow to remain true to her identity even when popular tastes moved in the opposite direction. Barbara also embodied the image of a complete entertainer. On stage, she didn't just sing, she confidently played pedal steel, banjo, saxophone, accordion, piano, skills that left audiences and peers in awe. The way Barbara transformed each concert into a full-scale performance laid the foundation for the very concept of the female entertainer in country music. Not simply standing still to sing, but being a true star who commanded every aspect of the show. Her influence was recognized through a cascade of honors: 2 consecutive CMA Entertainer of the Year awards, 1980 to 1981, a Grammy for the gospel album He Set My Life to Music, multiple ACM and American Music Awards. And in 2009, Barbara was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, a definitive affirmation that her name is woven into the very fabric of the genre's history. Barbara's impact is also evident in the women who came after her. From Reba McEntire to Carrie Underwood and Miranda Lambert, all have been shaped in some way by the trail she blazed. A path where women could be graceful yet powerful, steadfast yet creative. Many younger artists have openly acknowledged Barbara as an inspiration, the woman who proved that female artists could stand shoulder to shoulder with men in an industry long burdened by gender bias. Beyond music, Barbara left a mark on her community. After the 1984 accident, she became a strong voice for seatbelt safety, helping to shift social awareness toward road safety. These efforts were not glamorous, but they reflected her core nature, an artist who wanted to turn personal experience into something that could make life better for others. Today, even in her absence from the spotlight, the name Barbara Mandrell still evokes a standard: talent, discipline, resilience, and devotion to family. Her legacy lies not only in her records and awards, but also in the way she lived. A reminder that the greatest success is not always found under stage lights, but in holding true to one's values. Barbara Mandrell's life is living proof that glory is not built solely on applause. It is also shaped by collapse and by the strength to rise again from the shadows. From a child prodigy drilled by a strict father to the first female country artist to win Entertainer of the Year twice in a row, and later a victim of a devastating accident that halted her career, Barbara walked through every extreme of triumph and tragedy. But unlike many stars who cling to the stage, Barbara chose to step away while she was still beloved. She never tried to paint herself as flawless, nor did she hide behind the spotlight to cover her scars. Instead, she accepted them as part of her story: the losses, the years of lawsuits, the silences within marriage, and the regrets of not always being present for her children. All of these shaped a Barbara who was calm, resilient, and fully devoted to what truly mattered. Today, Barbara Mandrell no longer appears under the lights, yet she lives on in the public's memory as a proud witness of American country music, a woman who endured pressure, scandal, tragedy, and the erosion of time, only to return to what was most essential: family love and inner peace. If Barbara could leave the stage with a smile and to the sound of applause after all she endured, then perhaps the question for us is, do we have the courage to step away from fleeting glories in order to hold on to what is most precious in our own lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so we can journey together through more powerful stories to come.